Richard Nixon was the 37th President of the United States. His life was full of ups and downs. He was a man who worked hard, made big mistakes, but also achieved great things. This is the story of Richard Nixon. Richard Millis Nixon was born on January 9, 1913 in Yorba Linda, California. His family was not rich. His father, Frank Nixon, owned a small lemon farm. His mother, Hannah Nixon, was a very religious woman. Richard had 4 brothers. 2 of them died when they were very young. This was very sad for the Nixon family. Richard was a smart boy. He loved to read and study. He worked hard in school. He was also very good at debating. This means he was good at arguing his point of view. In high school, he joined the debate team and won many awards. After high school, Richard went to Whittier College. This was a small college near his home. He studied history and politics. He was also very active in student activities. He was president of the student body and played on the football team. After college, Richard went to Duke University Law School in North Carolina. He worked very hard and graduated near the top of his class. He wanted to be a lawyer. After law school, Richard returned to California. He started working as a lawyer. But soon, World War II began. Richard joined the Navy. He served in the Pacific Ocean. He did not fight in battles, but he worked hard and was promoted to the rank of lieutenant commander. After the war, Richard decided to go into politics. In 1946, he ran for Congress. He won the election and became a representative from California. He was only 33 years old. In Congress, Richard became famous for his work on the House Un-American Activities Committee. This committee investigated people who were suspected of being communists. Communism was a big fear in America at that time. Richard was very tough on communists. This made him popular with many Americans. In 1950, Richard ran for the Senate. He won the election and became a senator. 2 years later, in 1952, he was chosen as the vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party. The presidential candidate was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower and Nixon won the election. Richard Nixon was now the Vice President of the United States. He was only 39 years old. As Vice President, Richard Nixon worked closely with President Eisenhower. He traveled to many countries and met with world leaders. He was very active in foreign policy. He also helped Eisenhower with domestic issues. In 1960, Richard Nixon ran for president. His opponent was John F. Kennedy. The election was very close. Kennedy won by a small margin. Nixon was very disappointed, but he did not give up. In 1962, Nixon ran for governor of California. He lost the election. Many people thought his political career was over. Nixon himself said, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore." But he was wrong. Richard Nixon did not give up. He worked hard and stayed active in politics. In 1968, he ran for president again. This time he won. He became the 37th President of the United States. As president, Nixon faced many challenges. The Vietnam War was still going on. Many Americans were against the war. Nixon promised to end the war. He also promised to improve relations with other countries. One of Nixon's biggest achievements was improving relations with China. At that time, the United States did not have good relations with China. Nixon visited China in 1972. This was a historic visit. It helped to open up communication between the two countries. Nixon also improved relations with the Soviet Union. He signed the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty (SALT) with the Soviet leader, Leonid Brezhnev. This treaty limited the number of nuclear weapons both countries could have. But Nixon's presidency also had a dark side. In 1972, there was a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. The burglars were caught. It was later discovered that they were connected to Nixon's re-election campaign. At first, Nixon denied any involvement. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that Nixon had tried to cover up the break-in. He had recorded many of his conversations in the White House. These tapes were subpoenaed by the investigators. Nixon refused to hand them over at first, but eventually he was forced to. The tapes showed that Nixon had been involved in the cover-up. This was a very serious crime. Many people called for Nixon to resign. On August 8, 1974, Nixon announced that he would resign as president. He was the first and only U.S. president to do so. After resigning, Nixon returned to California. He was very embarrassed and ashamed. But over time, he began to rebuild his reputation. He wrote several books about his life and foreign policy. He also advised other presidents on foreign policy. In 1994, Richard Nixon died at the age of 81. He had a complicated legacy. He was a man who achieved great things, but also made big mistakes. He will always be remembered as a president who worked hard for his country, but was brought down by his own actions. Richard Nixon's life was a story of hard work, success, failure, and redemption. He was a man who loved his country and wanted to make it better. But he also made mistakes that cost him his presidency. His life teaches us that no one is perfect. We all make mistakes, but it is important to learn from them and try to do better. Richard Nixon will always be an important figure in American history. His achievements in foreign policy, such as opening relations with China and signing the SALT Treaty, are still remembered today. But his involvement in the Watergate scandal is also a reminder of the importance of honesty and integrity in leadership. Richard Nixon's story is a reminder that even the most powerful people are human. They can achieve great things, but they can also make mistakes. It is up to us to learn from their successes and failures, and to strive to be better. It tells about his life, his achievements, and his mistakes. Richard Nixon was a complex man, but his story is an important part of American history.